Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to At the Book, powered by Bet.NOLA.com. I'm Zach Ewing, along with Jim Derry and our producer, Devin Jackson, welcoming you to another episode of At the Book, where we look ahead at the football weekend with a betting twist, with a Louisiana twist, here on Bet.NOLA.com. And, hey, listen, the first thing we got to do is talk just a little bit about tonight's game. The weekend opens up with the Washington football team hosting the New York Football Giants. And if you look at the betting line, this one might be kind of dreary. It has the lowest total of any NFL game this weekend, just 40.5. Washington is a 3-point favorite, even though Ryan Fitzpatrick, Fitzmagic, is not playing tonight. He's hurt, and it'll be the Taylor Heineke show. Jim, what do you make of that?
Well, I originally liked the Giants going in, but then yesterday there's news of a possible injury to Saquon Barkley and his status, and I think that is a bigger effect on the game than Fitzmagic. So we saw Heineke play well last year in the Bucs game in the playoffs, and let's see what he can do. But this is a no play for me. If I had to play it, I would probably take the Redskins at -3. And a weird thing is usually when an under is that low, the under hits more often than not. So
there's a reason it's that low. You slipped up, by the way. They're the football team. That won't be the last time, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. It
won't be the last time I do that.
Yeah, it happens. Many years of training.
The public tends to take the over when they see unders that low because they think it's a great bargain, and I'm going to go the other way. So I'd rather take the under than take the football team.
There is one other game tonight on the college side, and it does have local interest, so we'll talk about that. The UL Raging Cajuns are at home, and they've gotten off to a slow start, quite frankly. They went to Texas. That was kind of a big spotlight game, lost that game, didn't cover the spread, then came home and played Nichols last week, didn't cover the spread by 3 touchdowns. They only won that game by 3 points, and the spread, I think, was 26. So they're a little bit surprising that they're getting 20 points at chalk here against the Ohio Bobcats. Total of 57, which means Vegas is expecting something in the neighborhood of, 38-18, something like that. I'd be a little nervous maybe laying that many points, but at the same time, Ohio's looked awful so far. They lost to Syracuse, who has been very bad the last couple of years. And then they actually lost as, I think, 31 or 32-point favorites last week to Duquesne. So do y'all have any thoughts on that one? I kind of feel like the play might be the Raging Cajuns here. I'm a little nervous about that many points with the way they've gone, though.
Yeah, I think Thursday night games are can go either way in terms of little preparation. It's going to be a lot of sloppy football, but I think I'll take the Raging Cajun here tonight. Just to cover the spread. I think they're going to come out a little bit more inspired. They barely got past Nicholls State over the weekend, so I think they'll have something to prove and want to look much better in front of their home crowd.
And by the way, we're going to get producer Devin's take on the Thursday night NFL game as well in our Big Bucks game, because it's one of his picks this week as we look back at how we did last week and what we're going to do this week in Big Bucks. But first, I want to get to the newest segment of Cashin' In with Carville. That's our pick'em game where you pick against James Carville. If you beat him, there are prizes at the end of every month, and then at the end of the season, there are the grand prizes. So you can log on to Bet.NOLA.com. Click the link for Cashin' In with Carville. The other link is NOLA.com/CashinIn. So either way, you can get there and pick against James Carville. We've got 8 games this week, including LSU and the Saints. Remember the way it works. James doesn't pick against LSU or the Saints. He's always going to pick them. So if you want to get ahead of him, you can fade the local teams if you want. But having said that, here is the Week 2 segment of Cashin' In with Carville. Zach Ewing here with the Week 2 episode of Cashin' In with Carville, alongside the one and only James Carville, who we've got some exciting things to talk about this week now. 5-1 last week against the spread. That's not going to happen every week. Heck, we might go 6-0, James. I don't know. How did you do it? 5-1 right off the bat.
I live in Louisiana as long as I have. I have contacts. And my man T-Boy Latchley lives on a houseboat deep in the Chapel Eye Basin. And, the man's got an algorithm. That's all I can tell you. And he don't talk to anybody. I knew him when I went to high school in Downsville, Louisiana, and T-Boy's in his mid-70s now. But all he does is fish and handicap. And
he's in his mid-70s. He's got to pass down the algorithm. I mean, that's
he's got a son. He might give it to him. I'd rather have T-Boy's algorithm than $100,000. I'll tell you that.
That's right. Otherwise, it'll be left with the Gators in the basin there.
Yeah, Latchley knows what he's talking about.
The other thing to be excited about would be the New Orleans Saints, who looked like world beaters against the Packers last week. What do you think about that?
I couldn't believe I was watching. It was a near perfect football game. I mean, literally, you'd had the feeling by the third quarter like you were watching LSU in 2019. Third down, you didn't worry about it. It was amazing. In the defense, holy moly. I mean, let's wait and see. But we thought, and all of us thought, that Green Bay, and for good reason, they won an NFC playoff game 2 years in a row prior to this season. We had more, obviously because of the storm and everything, more Packers fans were there. And I got to tell you, it was one of the most impressive performances I've ever seen by a professional football team. Now, if it turns out that Green Bay goes 4-13, and we'll say, well, but I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, Aaron Rodgers, it looked like I could have played quarterback. I mean, good.
You don't want to overreact to 1 week, but they looked as good as you can look in 1 week. That is true.
And it is true. And I mean, we'll see. I don't think Carolina's not that good. We're only a 3-point favorite. It's not. People are not jumping all over us. I think there's a wait and see attitude, which I'm sure Coach Payton likes.
The Saints are in a good spot. Before we get to the picks, quick thoughts on LSU. They had sort of their throwaway game against McNeese last weekend, took care of business. Central Michigan coming in this weekend before you get into the SEC slate. It could be a little bit of a trap for the Tigers. I think people sleep a little bit on CMU.
What bothers me is their offensive line. The over-under on total rushing yards against Alabama might be 25. Okay? That's a main thing that you got to fix. If you can't block, I don't know, man. They call it blocking and tackling. They even put blocking ahead of tackling. I mean, that's just the most fundamental thing in football. And maybe there's a glitch. Maybe there's something, and usually in defense, you can change the scheme around. There's not much you can do with your front five.
Ed Ogeron needs to figure it out for his own sake.
He really does. I hope he does. I like Coach Ogeron. He's a great guy. He's a Louisiana guy. But, man, this is a win. And you win here, you go somewhere else. And that's just the way it's going to be. And I think anybody that takes this job understands the terms upon which you take it. It's one of the most lucrative head coaching jobs in all of college football. So we'll see.
No doubt about it. Speaking of winning and being lucrative, let's get into week 2 picks. Again, the rules of engagement here, Mr. Carville does not pick LSU or the Saints per se. Those are games you're free to pick against LSU or the Saints. He's not going to do it. So that's how we go. If you can beat Carville, which was difficult last week because he was 5-1, then you can win some monthly prizes or some season-long prizes. So go easy on the people this week. Let's get started with some college picks. Nebraska at Oklahoma. The hometown Sooners are laying 22 points here.
I take the road team. I was in law school in 1971. Of course, the game was in late November, which was in the middle of the exams. I watched that entire game. It was one of the best football. Johnny Rodgers ran the punt back or kickoff back or whatever. I mean, that was one of the best games I've ever seen in my life.
Used to be a classic every year.
Oh, epic. Yeah, but 22 points is a lot. And so we're going to go with Nebraska.
All right. And next
let me just give you a caveat on the 5-1. That is not a permanent condition. So don't act like it is.
If you can go 5-1 every week, we'll quit our job and just go live in Vegas.
Yeah. All right. But next we got Alabama goes to Florida.
Alabama goes to Florida. The biggest spread ever for a top 15 team at home. The Gators the Gators are getting 14.5 points.
Alabama.
It's a bad business to bet against Nick Saban. So
yeah.
James Carville swallows hard and takes Alabama -3. And then finally, the nightcap, real good game here. Auburn at Penn State. Penn State is -6.
I think Penn State's pretty good. I mean, they went to Wisconsin. That's a tough place to win. And I spent a lot of time in Pennsylvania, and that they got a real home field advantage there. So I'm going to go with Penn State.
The Whiteout, yeah, -6 points. It'll be tough for Auburn to go up there and win. Moving on to the NFL, in the early window, we have the 49ers who, by the way, you talk about your bad beats. If you had 49ers -9 last week, they gave up 16 points the last 2 minutes of the game, and the Lions only lose by 8.
Right.
But now they're back on the road, back in the Eastern time zone, laying 3.5 in Philadelphia, who had a big win themselves last week. Where are you going here?
49ers. Philadelphia's not that good.
That might have been fool's gold for week 1 for Philly. So 49ers -3.5 is the pick. Moving on to the afternoon session, Titans at Seahawks up in Seattle, and the Seahawks are laying 5.5.
I take the road. I'll take the Titans here.
Titans with the points. They need to bounce back.
We need it, yeah. And but I got that running back they got was like off the charts.
Derrick Henry. Speaking of Alabama, right? I mean, the guy is a man among men.
And he might be the best running back in the league.
And he'll have to get uncorked there for sure. And then on Sunday Night Football, our final game will be Chiefs. They're -3.5 in Baltimore.
I take the Chiefs. We won with the Raiders against the Ravens. I mean, it was dicey. Let's put it that way. But you couldn't beat the Raiders. And there's some doubt. Baltimore was perceived to be an elite team. I'm not sure they are. Maybe they might prove me wrong, and I'll be eating my words. But we know the Chiefs are good.
Baltimore has injury upon injury too.
Yeah, they're pretty banged up. And the other I like is West Virginia's at home against Virginia Tech. I take West Virginia.
That's an interesting one because a lot of the computer models say Tech, but the sharp money seems to be going in on West Virginia. So you following the money there?
Yeah, a little bit. It looks weird. When something looks too good to be true, then it is too good to be true. And there's an element of contrarian in me. If you go and you look at the line, and it's always the old line is, always take 7.5, but not a half, because they're just dying at and a 7.5 point line is they're just dying for you, to take the 7.5 side. I mean, that's the greatest sucker line in the world.
Words of wisdom from James Carville. You got to be willing to.
Go ahead.
You got to be willing to zag when they want you to zig. In other words.
Yeah, you can figure what they're doing. And then Florida State goes to Wake Forest. All right, and they're +5.5. All right, I'm gonna be the sucker. I'm gonna walk into this trap and take Florida State. I mean, I couldn't get the word Wake Forest out of my mouth.
I got to say that was one of my picks this week too. I like Florida State. I think they're undervalued. It's an overreaction.
They had a hell of a game against Notre Dame. I watched that game. That's one of the best college football games I've seen. And of course, they got caught sleeping with Jacksonville State. And they're going back and they got something to prove.
Yep. And that was a short week against Jacksonville State. Now they've had a full week. So all of those sort of things. So a little lanyap from James. Again, to recap the picks this week, he's got the dog, Nebraska, +22 at Oklahoma. He's taken Alabama -14.5 at Florida. Penn State -6 against Auburn. Taking the 49ers, the Titans, and the Chiefs, 3 road teams in the NFL. So those are cashing in with Carville picks for week 2. James, we appreciate so much you taking the time.
Well, just remember, old T-Bar don't need a COVID shot. You don't need, he's not coming into contact with anything but alligators.
He's out there in the sticks. That's right.
He's out there in the sticks.
All right, James, we'll see you next week.
You bet.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that was cashing in with Carville for week 2. Man, fantastic stuff. He's talking about his bookie down in the Atchafalaya Basin, and he's talking about Coach O, and then he's talking about how he you can't bet on teams that are -7.5 because that's just the house, or bet against teams that are -7.5. That's just the house asking you to give them money. And I listen, the man is in his element when he's talking about sports betting.
Well, he sure is, but he's also in his element just in the entertainment field. So, God love him. And maybe I ought to just take the Saints and LSU every week because I can't keep losing ground to James Carville. I mean, he was right last week. Well, he was right with the Saints, but maybe we ought to just take the Saints and LSU. We don't want to give this guy any advantage. He's talking about the house. Maybe he's the house here.
Maybe he is. Even if he's got a guy with an algorithm out in the bayou, maybe talking to alligators and stuff. Maybe that's what he's. Hey, but he even with the auto loss for LSU, he auto picked LSU and that didn't cover. He auto picked the Saints. They did cover. So that was 1-1. He was 5-1 in the picks he made. So he's tied with a couple other people. I think it's 6-2. There's nobody who went better than him last week. I need to look at the standings again, but I don't believe anybody went 7-1 or 8-0 against the spread.
Zach, maybe he's getting advice from the Chudum guy.
Yeah, there you go.
Chudum.
Maybe that's who it is.
I mean, somebody's got to be helping him, right?
Hey, he's been around a long time. The man knows what he's talking about. Let's look real quick. The Saints this weekend are going to play the Carolina Panthers, and they had such a brilliant start last weekend. Let's take a look at that game real quick. That game's at noon on Sunday on Fox, and the Saints were, you can look at this line preseason, and the Saints were like 2.5 point favorites. So the line only moved a point from there, maybe 1.5 points, but it did move over the key number of 3 based on their performance last week. Jim, what do you make of that?
I think that's a key number. And, I had some haters getting on me last week because obviously I was incorrect about the final outcome of who would win straight up. I was correct in that the Saints would cover. Throughout the years, I do not like, and it doesn't matter who it is, I do not bet on road favorites in division games. About 75 to 80% of the time over the past decade, a home dog in a division game covers. Whether they win is a different story or not. I think this is a close game, first of all. So I'm going to take Carolina here, and actually it's one of my better plays. But I do think the Saints will win, but it wouldn't surprise me if they lose. I think it's going to be really tight. After all the travel that they've gone through the past few weeks, going back on the road, you got to go from Jacksonville back to Dallas, back to Carolina. We don't know what's going on this week, whether they're going to be able to practice at home as we take this. And it's a lot. And all the energy that they expended last week, I'm going to take the Panthers here, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if the Panthers won straight up. We've talked last week, Zach, about the week 2 woes for the Saints the past few years, and I talk about it extensively in my column this week. This week scares me a little bit. As well as they played last week, it scares me.
It is a big time letdown spot. As well as the Saints played, you've got to worry a little bit about, like you said, the travel effects, just the energy, both physical energy and emotional energy, right? Like, I mean, it was one thing to be keyed up for that game last week when everybody's doubting you and you know you're going to have to play in Jacksonville, and you get over that, and full credit to them. But now, can you do it again? Can you do it again against a team that you're supposed to beat? Devin, where are you thinking on this?
Yeah, I think this will be a close game as well. Historically speaking, I mean, Carolina has always the Saints tough, especially in that first matchup. So I think they'll kind of hold true in this one. I would pick Carolina to cover in this one, but I think the Saints will be able to pull out a win. I think it's going to be one of those games that, both teams kind of struggle, I think, early on offensively. Both of these teams have pretty solid defenses. Obviously, I think the Saints have a little bit better defense than Carolina, but Carolina is kind of a young team that's, kind of looking for, a signature win earlier in the season. Obviously, they played the Jets last week, so it's not exactly the biggest competition. But in terms of, what they bring to the table, kind of the history between the two teams, they typically play the game pretty close the first time around. So I expect this one to be a close battle. Saints on the road again. So, they've had their up and down shares on the road, especially in Carolina, but I think the Saints ultimately pull out the win, though.
Yeah, I don't think I'd play this game, but I am leaning Panthers. One thing I'll say is that for our pick'em contest for Cashin with Carville, when we pulled the line, it was still Saints -3, and that was earlier in the week. It's now 3.5, and there's a big difference there to me. I would feel a lot more comfortable with Panthers plus 3.5. That 3-point, we talk about it being a key number. This just feels like a game that could be right there, tied at the end. Somebody's trying to field goal. I mean, remember, even the Panthers struggled last year. They came to the Dome and had it feels like a 60-yard field goal by Joey Sly to win the game against the Saints, and it came up just short. And obviously, no fans, or limited fans. But this is not a gimme for the Saints by any stretch of the imagination.
No, and Zach, one real quick, if you do like the Saints here, get it now, because it's not going to go back to 3. It's only going to go up. I mean, people are going to be betting on the Saints. This is a perfect public reaction to Week 1 game. I bet by game time it's 4 or 4.5. And
4 is another key number, so that's good advice. Let's take a look at our Week 1 big bucks results.
No, let's not.
We're gonna pick that Band-Aid one more time. We're not gonna look at every game, but the best bet for listen, Devin smoked us this first week. And this is how hard sports betting is, guys. Devin smoked us. He was only up $24 from his $2,000 to start with. So his best bet was Carolina over the Jets, which that was almost a Jets backdoor cover. He barely snuck that out, especially earlier in the week. That number was 6. And so that was another one where if you got the Jets early in the week, you covered. And there are sharp bettors out there who will get Jets +6, come back later in the week, get Carolina -4, and they were real happy because it ended up a 5-point game. The one that didn't help Devin from having a real big week, he thought Penn State starts slow and not cover against Ball State, but the Nittany Lions were on their game last week. Jim, your best bet was Houston over Jacksonville, quite frankly, because that was the only one that won.
Really? Do we have to do that?
We did have to do that.
I got my tail between my legs as far as it can go now.
That was a good pick. Houston covered by 4 touchdowns. So
no, all joking aside, I'm upset with myself that I didn't put more on Houston there, and I'm upset that I didn't take the money line, because I think Jacksonville laying points on the road in any game anywhere was just silly, and so I should have put money on the money line as well and could have made some nice bucks there. And we all know about that Monday night game. I had the Raiders in that game. Yeah. I had them at 4.5, and I was sure could be that when they kicked the field goal to tie the game, that's where, as a bettor, right? I'm hoping the Raiders miss that field goal because, hey, 3-point loss, I'm golden. Now it goes to overtime. I was sure could be, especially after that crazy sequence where Carr ends up throwing an interception off of somebody's face mask in the end zone. Like, the Ravens are going to come down and score here and kill my +4.5, because that's the way things go. But they got it done, and it worked for me, didn't work for you. My picks, we all liked Iowa over Iowa State. That was a weird game where the public and the sharps were all on Iowa. The books didn't move the line, and then Iowa won outright. I couldn't figure that out. Usually the books don't get taken to the cleaners like that, but they did. That's one of the weirdest ones I've ever, and I'm not just saying in the last year or so. That line made no sense, and everyone's reaction to it didn't change it. So either someone thought they knew something that they didn't know, but you're right. The public and the sharps were on Iowa, and it never moved, and Iowa proved this right. So I was, even though I bet it and I was on Iowa, I was sure that I was going to be wrong, but I could not take Iowa there. They should have been a 4.5-point favorite, I thought.
Yeah, I don't understand that one in the least. Iowa needed turnovers to win that game, but we all knew they were going to get turnovers. So right. I don't, that was, to me, that was baked into the handicap. Let's take a look at our Week 2 best bets before we move on to our full picks. And we also need to talk about LSU just a little bit, but our best bets for Week 2. Devin, we're going to start with you, and you're going back to a MAC Big Ten game. This is the area, the part of the country where Devin comes from, and he understands a lot of these teams probably better than we do. And we talk about the Hawkeyes. He's fading the Hawkeyes, taking Kent State with 23 points.
Yeah, Iowa's offense, it just doesn't provide any explosive plays, really. And I know they're going up against a MAC opponent in Kent State, but Kent State was able to stay within for most of the game, at least within a couple touchdowns of Texas A&M a couple weeks ago. So I look at this game. I know Iowa has a great defense, but I just don't see them beating Kent State by 23 points. I think this is one of those games that Kent State kind of hangs around for a couple quarters, and they end up maybe, well, at least in the ideal world, to lose by 21. 21 points just because of Iowa starts to pull away. But I just think in this game you got to take Kent State in this matchup because of Iowa's lack of explosive offense. Plus, they like to sit on the ball too, so it's not going to be a lot of drives for them to score anyway.
It definitely feels like a game that could finish 23-7 or something like that. Now, you're going to have to avoid those turnovers, though. That's going to be the big deal there. Jim, you're taking the Cowboys at the Chargers, and we'll see on my picks when we go to my full picks. I actually took LA here thinking there was a little bit of an overreaction to Dallas keeping it close against Tampa Bay, but you're going to take them with the points on the road. The hook here may be key, too.
Actually, for me, no. I'm actually going to probably bet the money line as well as the spread. I like Dallas straight up in this matchup, and it goes more in my season rankings. I think Dallas is the clear best team in the NFC East. I thought that coming into the season, as long as Dak stays healthy. And meanwhile, I think the Chargers are a bit overrated. I know they were able to go into Washington and win that game last week. They did so. Again, they had the change of quarterback for the football team. Look, I think the Cowboys are a 10-win type of team this year. They showed it last week, going to the Super Bowl champions, hanging tough, having a chance, putting themselves in a position to even have a chance at the end. The line was 9, and they lost by 2. So I think Dallas, for some reason, is underrated, which is very unusual. So get them at a bargain while you can, and I think this is a great bargain. And I really do like the money line, which I think is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of plus 170.
Yeah, it's interesting because both teams were on the East Coast last week, but Dallas has the extra rest too. So there's a factor there. And maybe you're making me doubt my pick here because the Cowboys, maybe people overreacted to them playing well on Thursday night, but then there may be some overreaction to the Chargers beating Washington as well. My best bet of the week, back to the college game, Stanford, a 12-point favorite on the road. And I know this breaks every rule in the book to take a road favorite of double digits, especially because Stanford is nobody's idea of an overpowering college force. But they did go on the road and beat USC last week. And this is more based on the fact that Vanderbilt might be the worst SEC team in the history of the league. I'm sorry, they're no good. I apologize to the Vanderbilt fans out there, but you probably already know this. They did beat Colorado State last week, but Colorado State's no good either. They lost to an FCS team. Vanderbilt is going to be just treated rudely here by their guests. Stanford's got a new quarterback. They played him against USC. He looked great. Vandy can't score. They can't stop anybody. I'm sorry, 12 points not enough. And so that is my best bet of the week. Sticking with the college game, guys, LSU has an interesting one this week. They beat McNeese last week. Central Michigan comes into town. And this was a game that opened, I believe, at 20.5, and the line quickly adjusted down to 20 and now 19.5. The Chippewas are not a bad team. They played Robert Morris last week. Okay, I know you can't glean anything from that, but if you can glean anything, they completely physically dominated Robert Morris on the lines, only allowed him, I want to say it was 13 rushing yards. It was 109, maybe it was 23 rushing yards, 86 passing yards, 109 total yards. Combine that with LSU's offensive line problems, and I just don't feel great about LSU winning a blowout here. I don't know that anybody can feel great about LSU blowing anybody out.
I hate going with the public here. I really do. But obviously, and I don't know about the local public. The local public might, because they don't know anything about Central Michigan, they might be on the Tigers here. But I really like Central Michigan here. And not only do I think 19.5 is too much, but I think this is a single-digit type victory for LSU. And I think it's in the line of a 30-23 kind of game. This is a game that I'm not sure why LSU would schedule a Central Michigan. You have nothing to win here. I mean, you can get a win, sure, but it's not going to be an easy victory. It's the same reason why back in the day when I was at UNO and Tim Floyd was there, no one would schedule UNO. And they played Arizona really, really tight one game, and Lute Olson said, "I'll never play them again." And so this may be an example where Coach O and LSU says, "We'll never play Central Michigan again." I don't like the spread at all. I would definitely take the Chippewas here.
A couple of notes here, and I'm going to let Devin talk about Central Michigan because he is a MAC expert. But Jim McElwain is the coach, former Florida coach. Everybody remembers the photo with the shark and everything. I mean, this is the same Jim McElwain. So they have a veteran coach who knows the SEC, who's played in Death Valley before. So that could work into their favor. Now the players haven't, and maybe you get a rude awakening when you step into a Saturday night in Tiger Stadium. But this team is no slouch. They could win the MAC. I'll let Devin speak to that. But they played Missouri in their first game. They lost the game 34-24, but actually outgained Missouri by, it was close by 10 or 15 yards, but just played them straight up pretty well. I think they had a few turnovers that ended up costing them in that game, but they played Missouri toe to toe. Is LSU that much better than Missouri? They probably are, but they lost at Missouri last year. I don't know that anybody trusts LSU right now. But I'm going to let Devin. What else can you tell us about Central Michigan?
Yeah, they have a transfer quarterback, I think, from Washington. That's starting this season, and he threw the ball all over the yard against Missouri, and they have two pretty good corners. They have a solid secondary. So I was surprised, once they played Missouri, that they were able to kind of stay neck and neck with them and move the ball up and down the field. And we know LSU's defense has some holes in them, specifically, trying to move, side to side to match up with some of the motions and things like that. Central Michigan has a few players offensively that, kind of are some speed guys that can test the waters. I don't expect them to throw out like Derek Stingley or Eli Ricks or the LSU secondary, but I think they can find some holes and gash the LSU defense a little bit in the run game. So I wouldn't be surprised if Central Michigan stuck around for a good portion of the game. I think, like you said, he got Jim McElwain. He's very experienced coaching up against LSU. So I think Central Michigan has a real shot here to make this an interesting game. I don't think they'll win the game, but I think they'll definitely cover the spread. And that 19.5-point spread, I think, is a little bit too much for this type of game, considering how well they played against Missouri.
Guys, I got to admit, it worries every bone in my body when we agree on everything.
I was thinking Now we're really in trouble because I was thinking the exact same thing.
We agreed on the Saints. We thought, that 3 is going to be real close, and now we agree on LSU and Central Michigan. There's got to be something wrong with us. But the good news is it's time for Big Bucks, and on Big Bucks, I think we do have some games, where we disagree on this stuff. And so it'll be real interesting. We got Devin's picks up first. And we talked about Kent State and Iowa. That's his big money game for $55. Devin has turned $2,000 into 2024. So look out. Devin, what you buying with all that extra money?
Well, another college game that kind of caught my eye in terms of the line is Fresno State 11.5 against UCLA. They just played Oregon pretty closely a few weeks ago.
Within a touchdown, yeah.
So I'm thinking, I know UCLA is a little bit more physical, a little bit more dominant in their wins, but I would think, Fresno State can cover that spread and keep it within at least 10 points, I would say. I don't expect them to win the game or make it that close, but I think they can. Their offense is good enough to stick around. And then the NFL game tonight, I like the Giants against Washington tonight. I think Washington is on a short week. They have a new quarterback. He really hasn't taken, first snaps, in practice and kind of building a chemistry. And I just feel like this is kind of a must-win game for the Giants. And it's early in the season to say that, but I think they have to win this game to really build confidence and believe that they can compete in NFC East. I know how good the Cowboys looked against the Bucks, but I like the Giants defense. I think they're going to make it difficult for Washington, and I think they're going to force a few turnovers and ultimately get the win. So I'd like them tonight against the Giants. And then the last one, I like Tennessee against Seattle. I think the week 1 admiration, obviously Tennessee looked really bad. The Seahawks look really good, but I think Tennessee is going to bounce back in a big way and make the game really close against Seattle. And maybe even win the game. I think that's how close this game will be between the Titans and Seahawks. But those are some of the the games that I thought, for sure that I'd take a look at and put something down on.
Devin hoping that dogs bark, man. He's got 7 underdogs there out of his 8 picks. So if the dogs are barking this weekend, that number is going to go up for Devin Jackson. I will say I heard a stat about Daniel Jones, the Giants quarterback. He's got like 10 wins in 2 years in his career or something like that. He's 4-0 against Washington. So like half of his wins in his career have come against the Washington football team. And I maybe I don't know if that's just a coincidence or if there's a trend there worth following. But that is the play there for Devin tonight is Giants +3. Let's move on and we'll do Jim's picks, and Jim's got some catching up to do. But by the way, just to explain real quick, Jim, before you get into this, the reason we have 55, 33, 22, 44 listed is those are -110 bets for those who don't know how it typically works. And so if you're betting -110, the house is going to take 10% of your winnings. And so we're betting 44 with the thought that if we win, we can add 40. And so that's instead of if you bet 40, it becomes a fraction. You get 37-18 or whatever you end up getting. You end up with pennies. And so you bet 44 to win 40, 33 to win 30, et cetera, et cetera. And we consider each one of those a unit. So if you're real confident, you'll bet 5 units, and that's $55. If you're not too confident, you might only bet 1 or 2 units, and that's your $22 bets. So having said that, Jim, we talked about your top pick, the Cowboys. What else you like on this weekend's board?
When you talk about pennies, that's what I'm going to have left at the end of the season if I don't start getting my stuff together. Maybe you can make a lot of money by taking the opposite here. No, we talked about Dallas already. I really like the New England under. We talked in my column a little bit about over and unders. I did really well on over and unders last week. I think it was 11-5 overall. The low unders, if you look at last week, a lot of the low unders hit, a lot of the high overs hit. So, and that's because the public tends to see numbers, and when they see these numbers, they like to jump on, 42, that's way too low. I'm going to jump on that. 43, way too low. 52, way too high in an NFL game. I'm going to jump on the under there. And look, I was a victim of it in the Kansas City Cleveland game. I took the under in that because I thought 54.5 was too high, and I was wrong. So, and then also Vegas really knows how to set an over under. Last week, the average score in a game was 48. The average over-under combined was 47.3. So they were right on the mark, as they usually are. But if you talk about this week, I'm just going to pick out 1 or 2. I really do like the New England under, as I said. Green Bay, I think, has a huge bounce back against Detroit. I had all these texts about Aaron Rodgers of there's something wrong with him. He's just fine. RELAX. He'll be just fine. And then in the college game, Alabama, I think I'm just going to do this the rest of the year, Zach. If Alabama is 3 touchdowns or less favorite, I'm just going to take the Crimson Tide. They're going to Florida. They look like the Alabama of the last 10 years, and why not? So I think they win big. I mean, I didn't see anything in Florida that I really liked last week against South Florida. They got a new quarterback as well, and he made some interesting throws there later in the game when Florida was up pretty good. So I'm going to take the Crimson Tide. I think they win by 3 or 4 touchdowns here.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one because this is another little nugget I heard. Florida is the biggest home underdog for a top 15 team ever. No top 15 team has ever been more than a 2-touchdown underdog at home in the history of college football betting. So
wasn't LSU in the top 15 early in the season last year when they lost to Mississippi State?
No, but they wouldn't have been a 2-touchdown.
No, I know.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. So rankings don't mean all that much to me.
No, they don't. They absolutely don't. But it is interesting to see, and yet the money still pours in on Alabama to the point where you've seen some 15s in this game. So that's a very interesting one to keep an eye on. I mean, is the Saban machine so indestructible that they can just cover any of these double-digit spreads that we would worry about with literally any other team? And I don't know the answer to that, but I guess we'll find out. And Jim's betting on the Crimson Tide. Okay, my big bucks picks for the week, and again, I guess I'm the degenerate. I do like to spread it around. grind out bets a little bit, spread the risk around, and you can see how much good it did me. I made $3 last week, so what can you guys say to that?
It's better than me.
Winning money is always better than losing
correct.
money, even when it's $3. That is the truth of gambling right there. Just to pick out a couple, I talked about Stanford. There's a lot of college lines I like here. I'm taking a couple of big favorites because I just think that the teams they're playing are not very good with Michigan and Texas A&M. But the other interesting one here is Florida State, and we heard James Carville talk about this one too. I only got it at 5. It was 5.5 or 6 earlier in the week. That's an extreme overreaction. I mean, you have to remember Florida State took Notre Dame to overtime on Labor Day night, and maybe Notre Dame is not a top 10 team. Yes, they did. They did almost lose to Toledo, but both of those teams were on short rest. They both played Monday, had to turn around, play Saturday in a different location. So that was part of that for me. And now that Florida State's had a full week, nobody believes in them. Preseason, this line would have been maybe a pick, maybe even Florida State -2 or 3. There's extreme value here on the Seminoles plus 5 points. And so I like that one. I actually wish I had put a little bit more on it. But I also, having watched them lose to Jacksonville State, didn't want to risk too much, which is understandable. And then in the NFL, a couple of games I like. I talked about the Cowboys maybe being overvalued, so that's a spot where we disagree. Them going out to LA, we'll see how that goes. I agree with Jim on the Packers. And then one that I kind of added late, another one where I'm trying to play against the overreactions. The Bears, yes, they were on Sunday Night Football. Yes, the Rams beat them up good. But again, the Rams might be the best team in the NFL. They're certainly in the running for the best team in the NFC. And the Bengals, yeah, they beat the Vikings, but do we really like the Vikings so much? Now they're going on the road, and you've only got to win by a field goal here if you're the Bears. I think Justin Fields gets a few more snaps, and I think the Bears come through and cover that spread. So those are my big bucks picks. You can also find our bets on the Carville Pick'em games in Friday's edition of The Advocate and Times Picayune, and anytime on bet.nola.com. We're super excited for week 2. Again, you can enter the Cashin in with Carville contest, play against James Carville, play against us, bet.nola.com. Figure out if you can win some prizes for the month of September, or stay in the running all year long and win some cash prizes and other things, including a catered crawfish boil. We got awesome prizes for the end of the year. So play along with us at bet.nola.com. Any final thoughts that we didn't talk about? Devin, I'm going to go to you first. What are you most looking forward to here, week 2 of NFL, week 3 of college football?
I think, there's going to be some games or some teams in NFL that people kind of overlook after week 1. So it'll be interesting. I'm really excited about the Kansas City-Baltimore game to see how that kind of works out and see if the Ravens can bounce back because we know that they've struggled against Patrick Mahomes over the last few seasons. So that's a game that not from a sports fan perspective per se, more as a fan. But I'm also interested to see like the Texas A&M game. I was a little bit worried about them covering because their starting quarterback is still hurt as well. So I am a little bit worried about that game and how their offense looked against Colorado with the backup quarterback. So that's a game that I'll be watching too from a betting perspective to see if Texas A&M will cover or not. I think it was 29-point spread. But those are some things I'm looking forward to this weekend.
Yeah, listen, all week this week, you've got to fight those overreactions, decide which ones are appropriate reactions, and decide which ones where the line's gone too far. Jim, how about your thoughts?
You just kind of stole my thunder. I want to see how the overreactions play out this week. I think this week 2 is probably going to be a good week for Vegas. One would think, because they always make money off those overreactions. And we talked about the Cowboys. I'm really interested to see how they come off of that week 1 game against the Bucs, having to travel 2 weeks in a row. I'm really interested in the Panthers, and we never talked about them, and frankly, a lot of people in New Orleans don't want to hear about them. But Atlanta, I don't get this team with all this talent. I don't understand how they played so poorly against a team I don't think is very good last week in Philadelphia. So I'm interested to see if they are able to go to Tampa Bay. I don't think they can win there, but I do think that they can play well. The Falcons, to me, are a sneaky pick because that's probably a line that at 12.5 as I took it. I didn't look at it today, but I got to think that's going to go to the 13.5 range. So overreaction in week 2 usually start to play themselves out, and people say, "Ooh, maybe Aaron Rodgers isn't done after all." So he gets a healthy dose of the Lions on Monday night this week. And for anyone that has any Packers on Monday night, they ought to have a good week this week.
Yeah, this is the fun part now that you get to sort of see how lines move from week to week and how teams play. And okay, was that real or was that inflated by turnovers, inflated by luck, inflated by other stuff? And you get to play against those lines. That's the fun part. Sports betting is coming in Louisiana. We expect some news soon. One last thought: underdogs were 9-7 straight up in the NFL in Week 1. Not against the spread. I think they were 12-4 against the spread. 9-7 straight up. That will not happen this week. I'm guaranteeing you that. The favorites will have their day this week in the NFL and college football too. It was a good day for the underdogs. Oregon beat Ohio State. Florida State lost to Jacksonville State. USC lost to Stanford. I think we might see some more chalk this week just as things swing back the other way. But the best part is we get to find out in a couple of days. This has been At the Book at bet.nola.com. He's Devin Jackson. He's Jim Derry. I'm pointing the wrong way because we're on a screen. That's Devin Jackson. That's Jim Derry. This is At the Book, and we'll see y'all next week.